I find it kind of ironic that science seems to strengthen your faith, but for Richard Dawkins, it gives him, he claims it gives him evidence for not having faith. You know, how do you, I mean, are y'all believing the same science here, or why is the same science leading you in different ways?
Well, Richard Dawkins, the Oxford evolutionary biologist, is somebody whom I consider a friend. Richard has been very kind to me personally. He has
said, he sings your praises all the time.
He says good things about my books. He's promoted them in Great Britain. We've actually shared the platform at a conference in the United States a couple of years ago, and I enjoyed all of my interactions with him. I also think that he's a terrific popularizer of science. He's a great writer in terms of explaining modern evolutionary theory. So those are all the good things. I am not convinced of Richard's gifts as a philosopher or theologian. And I think he makes, as many people do, the fundamental mistake of not knowing where science ends and where philosophy begins. In effect, Richard is a practitioner of a philosophy that is called scientism. And scientism is the claim that either science can explain everything, or the only questions worth asking are the ones that science can in fact address empirically. I think scientism is way too narrow a view of the world in which we live. And I'll give you a quick example of the way in which I would approach this. I am absolutely convinced that the natural world as we know it has within it all of the tools and all of the factors within the laws of chemistry and physics to bring forth the evolution of life and eventually the evolution of intelligent beings like us. I think that's exactly what happened. So does Richard Dawkins. But I would then ask a deeper question, which is, why is the universe organized in such a way that that could happen? What is there about the fundamental character of energy and matter that actually allows the evolution of intelligent, reflective, self-aware beings like us? To that question, Dawkins would either say, it's not a question that matters, or I just don't care. I would give that question an answer this way. And I would say the very fact that we are in a material universe where the conditions of energy and matter make possible the evolution of sentient beings like us is an argument for the notion that that universe is the product of a divine intelligence that wanted this to happen. And therefore, far from seeing ourselves as sort of a random or accidental process of evolution, I think evolution tells us that we are the fruits of the natural world, that we are here because this universe is organized in such a way to make us possible. And I think rather than putting us at the periphery of existence, that puts us right in the middle. And that's an answer that to me is remarkably consistent with what we learn about ourselves through faith.
Doctor, would you say you pray with science?
Well, I think many people take what you and I would probably both call a pedestrian view to prayer, which is that prayer is you get down on your knees, you make the sign of the cross, and you say, I want this, I want that, please don't let that happen, and so forth.
Santa list.
But I think anyone who's serious about religion would realize that is the lowest form of prayer. Higher forms of prayer approach contemplation, genuine self-reflection, trying to think about your relationship with God and with those around you, as a matter of fact. And I think it's also important that we see everyday activities in a prayerful way. You know, I was brought up in an environment, and I'm talking about my own family, in an environment that sort of idolized work. And what I mean by that, my grandfather, for example, one of the most influential men in my life, was a welder. And he taught me to work with my hands and to love machinery. And I think he saw that as a kind of prayer, using the skills that he had. And I think in many respects, it's appropriate to see scientific inquiry as an extension of that. We were given the capability to do science. And to me, the most straightforward way to lead what you might call a prayerful life is to use those capabilities in the service of human knowledge. And that's one of the ways in which I would justify science and basically validate the scientific enterprise. And I'm going to steal a line from a Jesuit brother of yours, Guy Consolmagno,
Yes.
who works at the
Observatory.
Vatican Observatory. And because Guy is a scientist, he's a PhD astrophysicist, he's often asked if he finds anything in science that justifies his faith. In other words, people keep thinking that Guy is going to look in the telescope upward and someone say, there's God, or something like that.
There's the beard.
That's right. And the way that Guy puts it is something I absolutely love. And he says, I don't believe in my faith because of science. Rather, I believe in science because of my faith. And I think that's a very nice way to put it.
Finally, last question. Promise. If the book of Genesis has not been written, and you were the one inspired to write it, now, how would you begin the story of the beginning?
Well, it depends whether you wanted a book of empirical natural history or not, or whether you wanted something that in figurative language captured exactly what happened at the origin of our universe. And I can't think of a better way to start than in the beginning, and to say that there was a void. And into this void, or out of this void, came everything we know in an unfolding natural world. And to me, the great insight of the book of Genesis, and I think everyone should think about this, the great insight of the book of Genesis is not the sequence of creation or the separation of land from water. It's certainly not the age of the earth. The great insight in Genesis is that all this had a beginning. And I think today we take that for granted, but it's worth noting that many of the great figures of atheism, Bertrand Russell is a very good example, actually argued for a steady state universe, a universe that always was and always will be. And Russell said something to the effect that the need for beginnings is simply reflective of the poverty of human imagination. That's why we like to think of the beginning of a universe. And a broader imagination would come over to his view that it always been here, it always would be. We don't have to think of a cause for it. Well, it turns out that science has proven Bertrand Russell, and for that matter, initially Albert Einstein as well, quite incorrect. The universe really did have a beginning. And I think that great insight, which is in the book of Genesis and is in the tradition of all the Abrahamic faiths, reflecting that is exactly the way that I would start my narrative. I'd certainly use in the beginning, I would say that the earth was dark and without form, and that I would then give a sequence of events to describe the wonderful things that led to the production of the solar system and our planet and eventually life itself.
That's so interesting because we often forget that even non-literal narrative can express truth.
Indeed. No, and I think that's an important point. And it's funny because many people understand that in ordinary discourse. For example, one of my favorite American writers, maybe my favorite, is William Faulkner. And I think Faulkner's novels, especially The American South, are without parallel. And I don't think anyone would be surprised if I said there is great truth in Faulkner's stories, in Absalom, Absalom, in As I Lay Dying, in The Wild Palms, and his other stories and novellas. But let's suppose someone to say, wait a minute, Faulkner wrote fiction. He made everything up. How can there be truth in that? Well, the answer is Faulkner's truth is a much deeper truth than a mere historical record like a newspaper of the history of the American South or the history of all of us as a people. Faulkner's truth is much deeper. So I think there are easy ways to understand how Scripture can also convey great truths without being strictly historical or strictly scientific. And understanding that, I think, is the key to understanding why the Scriptures were written in the first place.
Thank you, Dr. Miller, for taking the time and being so generous to speak with us today. Talking with you took me to new heights of contemplation.
That's very kind of you to say, and I really enjoyed this, and I wish you all the best.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.